Are you familiar with General Soleimani?
Yes. Go ahead. Give me a little. Go ahead. Tell me.
He runs the Quds forces.
Yes. Okay. Right.
Do you expect
and I
his
think the
behavior?
Kurds, by the way, have been horribly mistreated by us.
No, not the Kurds. The Quds forces, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Quds forces, the bad guys.
Right.
Do you expect his behavior to change as a result?
I thought you said Kurds.
No. Quds.
I'm sorry. I thought you said Kurds.
It's the faithless logician, dropping what's been missing. Coming for the jugular, but not let me catch you slipping. No tool needed other than my mind to dissect these delusions and correct them in real time. The slayer of dogma and baseless assertions don't come with that weak shit or you'll soon need a surgeon. But it's too late for your argument. It's been torn and shred. There is no coming back. It is completely dead. All I need is my brain and my pen to use as I see fit to flay and or mend these inexcusable policies that are impossible to defend. All I need is my brain and my pen. No trust needed, just take a second and listen as I redirect and clear your clouded attention to focus on the facts, evidence, and testable predictions, painting a picture to help explain these insights, hypotheses, and suspect claims, giving you the tools needed to separate the truth from the false and the utterly inane. The marks are legion and too many to name, but they all love money, bathing in it with no shame, while the rest of us fight over their scraps, struggling just to maintain. They've never read a war that they would not fund, yet they treat citizens asking for health care as low-life scum. But we're done asking, so get ready, because here the we come.
Don't worry, Donnie. I didn't know much about the leader of the Iranian Quds Force either until recently, though the president probably should. So let's start there. Qasem Soleimani, who the United States just assassinated at the Baghdad International Airport, was, according to the mainstream press, apparently the world's #1 bad guy. The mastermind behind the deaths of hundreds, nay, thousands of Americans, who also exported terrorism and fueled sectarian violence for decades in countries such as Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Bahrain, Yemen, and Afghanistan. And more importantly, there was extensive and very solid, clear, compelling, unambiguous intelligence to indicate Soleimani was planning, coordinating, and directing a significant campaign of violence against the United States. So what other choice did we have? And these attacks still may happen, so be afraid. Be very afraid. Oh, and they are also super confident that Soleimani was responsible for the recent attack that killed one American quote-unquote contractor. 100%, believe us, despite a total dearth of evidence to indicate any of these outlandish claims. Shocker. And that list of countries sounded very familiar. Where have I heard them before?
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the joint staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." So I came back to see him a few weeks later. And by that time, we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today. And he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
That was the one. Not exactly the same, but pretty close. And 5 years was a bit ambitious, but it seems we're both looking to terrorize the same country. So let's see how it stacks up to reality. Iraq is a check in our column, though it does seem to be in play again. Syria was oh so close, yet despite funding and fueling the so-called moderate rebels linked to ISIS, Al-Nusra Front, and other Al-Qaeda offshoots wreaking havoc in Syria, and staging at least one supposed chemical attack to use as an excuse for escalation, the United States just couldn't close the deal. While Iran and Russia helped Bashar al-Assad defend his country, so that's a check for them. Lebanon was attacked by ISIS, but with the help of the Iranian-backed Hezbollah, they were able to chase the Islamic jihadists into Syria. So I guess that's a check for them, though Lebanon is still a stable country, so they have some work to do. We're definitely involved in Somalia and probably the Sudan too, but they're both pretty much still on the board. And I know nothing about Bahrain, so let's move on to Yemen, where the world's largest humanitarian crisis is playing out right now, where the United States is supporting the Saudi-led coalition, which is mercilessly using antiquated, barbaric siege warfare tactics, putting hundreds of thousands of civilians in danger of starvation, cholera, and indiscriminate bombing campaigns, making it a definite check for our column. In Libya, we helped the rebels dispose and sodomize Gaddafi with a Bowie knife, quickly turning the most prosperous country in northern Africa into a failed state ravished by bloody civil war with open slave markets and its very own franchise of ISIS to boot. Thanks, Hillary.
So, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, I'm sure it did.
So by my count, that makes the score 2-2 going into the battle for Iraq, round 2, with Somalia, Sudan, and possibly Bahrain still up for grabs. But how did Iran become America's immortal enemy in the first place? Other than the fact that they had the audacity to place their country square in the center of all of our military bases. Prior to the CIA overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh, the Iranians had a short window where they were finally able to gain some control over their country. With the first democratically elected government in place, they were able to take control of and nationalize the oil industry, as well as introducing a wide range of social and economic policies, which inevitably sealed Mossadegh's fate. An American puppet was quickly installed to rule and did so for 25 loyal years, serving as the United States vassal. Until the Iranian Revolution of 1979. Since then, things have been a little rocky to say the least. But pulling back a bit to look at the big picture and putting it in very simplistic terms, you can look at the whole region as a civil war between the two major Islamic branches of Sunni and Shia. On the Sunni side, you have Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE, Egypt, and Yemen, as well as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Al-Nusra Front, and every other Wahhabi Salafist extremist, which is not to say every Sunni Muslim is a Wahhabi Salafist extremist, but it is true that every Wahhabi Salafist extremist is a Sunni Muslim. This side also happens to be backed and supported by the United States and Israel. The other side, the bad guys if you will, are the Shia, which consist of mainly Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen. But why are they the bad guys, you may be asking? Is it because they're the ones that foster and spread the extreme toxic ideology of Wahhabi Salafism, the ideology which drove the terrorists on 9/11, the same ideology espoused and spread by Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, the ideology represented by the black flag of ISIS? Nope, that would be our side. If you're confused, don't worry, you're not the only one. But I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm just here to give you the most accurate, up-to-date information I can find, which will hopefully incite you to do your own research and come up with your own conclusions. Now, circling back to Soleimani and his role in all of this, yes, he did help the Iraqi insurgents prior to 2011, leading to the deaths of many American soldiers in Iraq. But he was invited there by the Iraqi people while we invaded illegally on fraudulent pretenses. The U.S. was only invited back to Iraq in 2014 to help clean up the mess that they created, on the understanding that they would not attack Iranian forces on Iraqi soil, which is probably why, in the wake of Soleimani's assassination, the Iraqi government has voted to oust the United States once more. Soleimani, with a whopping 82% approval rating, is one of, if not the most popular person in all of Iran. He is credited with leading the fight against ISIS in Iraq, Syria, and anywhere else he was needed, ultimately preventing it from entering Iran. ISIS truly is an existential threat to the Shia population and anyone else of the Middle East that is not a Sunni extremist. In general, Soleimani was a key figure in combating them. So why him? Why now? Is it really because he was planning an imminent attack on United States personnel and allies, as the official narrative states? Well, according to the Iraqi Prime Minister, General Soleimani was not in Baghdad to plan any attack, but to represent Iran in peace talks with Saudi Arabia, with the prime minister playing mediator in an effort to de-escalate tensions in the region. But apparently, peace is bad for business. So to quickly summarize, a divided Iran is now galvanized by Soleimani's perceived martyrdom, pushing them closer to Iraq than ever before. The Iran deal is officially dead. Iraq votes to kick out the United States from its country again, and all the while, ISIS seems to benefit. Meanwhile, completely lost in all this is the actual Iraqi people themselves in what they want. For months, mostly the youth have been protesting both United States and Iranian influence over their country. These mainly peaceful protests have been met with tear gas and live ammunition, killing hundreds and wounding more. Yet the protesters are winning some minor victories, such as convincing the prime minister to resign, dismantling the corrupt elections commission, and setting up an interim government. But their list of demands also includes such democratic reforms as separation of church and state, equality for sex, race, and religion, redistribution of wealth back to the people, and sovereignty. If I didn't know any better, I'd say that these crazy brown people are a lot like us. But like I said, peace is bad for business and business is booming. Recently, only 44 congressional Democrats such as Tulsi Gabbard, Ro Khanna, Ilhan Omar, and AOC actually voted against the latest National Defense Authorization Act, which gives the Pentagon and ultimately the president $738 billion. And as anyone who knows anything about budgets can tell you, if you don't spend it, you lose it. So bombs over Baghdad it is. One last interesting note. The latest NDAA actually had a provision in it written by Tulsi Gabbard which would have prevented this latest attack. But as you might have guessed, or may have heard in my last video, that provision, along with many others, was dropped without contention. Happy New Year, everyone. Hopefully this is not our last. Jana.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall we had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war.